I welcome you all to the sixth webinar of the series in collaboration with EMBO. And today, for this webinar, we have Bernd Pulverer, who's the head of EMBO Press. And in today's webinar, we'll be talking more about transparent publishing. How do we take our research from bench to journal? And since the last webinar was again about open science, I'm sure this is going to be a good addition and continuation to the last webinar that we had. Looking forward to the session, Bernd. Just before we begin, just a few housekeeping instructions. Make sure you can hear us, see us. If you can see us, hear us, just put a thumbs up in the chat window, and that'll just give us satisfaction that you're able to hear us and see us. The other things are that make sure you are on mute, but it'll be nice to see you. So if possible, please switch on your videos. We'll be having a question answer session towards the end, which is going to be a dedicated 10 to 15 minutes question answer session. But feel free to keep putting up your questions in the chat box, and we'll take them as and when it feels relevant, or we'll take up towards the end. So without further delay, I'll hand over the stage to Bernd. And yeah, I'll ping you around 3:50 if it goes beyond that, but otherwise you're all set to go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Arushi, and thanks also for pinging me and keeping me under control. Basically, it's true that we had a talk already last year, which was more focused on the bigger picture, and this time we try to focus a bit more on the journal perspective. But I'm trying to link it back to open science topics we discussed before. And yes, please, let me reiterate the question and answer session. It would be much better if I'm sure you have things on your mind that I'm not going to cover. So please feel free to ask about anything you want to do with publishing, including comments, critical comments, very welcome, because it is a very constrained and intense process. So please use the opportunity. And if you have questions that come up afterwards, we're always here to also connect to you. And I should mention, I just see Sarita came on to the call. My colleague Sarita, who just joined us for Life Science Alliance and is originally from India, she's also on the call. Yeah. So she can also answer questions. Okay, great. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we select papers at our journals. But again, everything I say applies to all, if you want, quality journals or selective journals. So this is not just the sort of advertorial for our journals. And how we try to sort of add quality control to the processes at various steps. I will focus a little bit on reproducibility, which is a really important topic in science. There's some problems in biosciences around this, as opposed to research integrity, which is also something I'll cover, but that's often conflated, and it's a different topic. That's very important to remember. And then sort of link it all back to open science, which is really not just focused on basically our aim here at the journals is to really move from the old days of where we are focused very much on text, on how we tell stories about the data we generated, to really adding back data to that story. So I think that's sort of an important thing we can easily forget at the journals. So just as background, we started publishing in 1982 with the sort of EMBO was actually founded in the 60s with the evolution of molecular biology as a discipline. But the journals only started in 1982, but really there was the sort of heyday of really the beginning when biochemistry morphed into molecular biology, if you want. And in fact, I started my PhD around 1985, I think. So not too much after that. And now the journals have grown. We have 5 journals now, and we have a new platform we call Review Commons, which I'll also explain very briefly. And together we launched these journals to really cover the whole spectrum from really hardcore biophysics which was really some of the origin. Actually, funnily enough, molecular biology was founded by physicists. It's kind of worth remembering that sometimes, and really goes all the way to medical research. So that's something that we thought is better served by having several different journals, but they're all rather selective. And I'm going to try to explain what I mean by selective in a minute. And at the bottom here, you see sort of some headline scope summaries. I should mention Life Science Alliance, which Sarita is a member of, is actually published together with Cold Spring Harbor Labs and Rockefeller University Press. We thought to do this as sort of more as a joint collaborative effort, which is actually great. It's very rare in publishing, which is a very competitive business also. So we're very happy that this works. A quick note that we are fully open access since the last year. And it's important to make one critical point that we don't want to open access is a no-brainer for the readerships because everyone in the world can access, read, and actually use the information you have in these papers with minimal restriction. But it is very, very sensitive for the authors because and we are very careful that we don't want to turn the whole thing upside down and make it even less equitable for authors and scientists who want to share their information. So with that in mind, we've started to be more differentiated in our charging model. We have 5 different tiers of charges now, which sort of try to map it a bit onto science funding and GDP in different regions of the world. And you can see India here actually has 25% of the full rate, which is around 1,600 or 1,700 euros at the moment. But I should mention that, or I should emphasize that we won't exclude anybody from publishing a paper in the journal. So if you cannot pay that, then you just there's a double layered waiver process that you can apply for. Just remember when you submit to already tick the relevant box because it's much easier upstream than downstream. Also, nobody who's funded directly by EMBO is charged anyway. Okay, so why is it so expensive? We always hear back, this is kind of weird numbers. Where's this coming from? Don't you just slap the stuff on the internet and that's it? So basically, the key point is that we only publish 10 to 15% of the submitted papers. So we spend a lot of work, unfortunately, on rejecting papers, but that increases the costs quite dramatically. And very open for discussion on that sensitive topic. We also run our journals with professional staff, so that includes me and Sarita, and our biggest salary part is actually our biggest cost part is actually the salaries. So basically, we do that because it gives us independence and it gives us a lot of time, or relatively a lot of time, to focus on details and to really do professional job on things. The other model is to run journals with academic editors, and in fact, vast majority. By the way, there is about 35,000 journals in the biosciences, so that's a huge jungle out there. Most of these are run by academic editors, and that can work very well too. But I would just like to make the point because often people say it's just a waste of money to have professionals. It's like with anything. It's hidden costs essentially if academics do it because you still spend hours. If you do it properly, it takes time, and taking time costs money, which just comes from another pot of money, which is your salaries. So basically, it's the cost is the cost basically. We also trying really hard to add value beyond the classical peer review and editing, if you want, like sort of core business of journal publishing, by having integrity support, research integrity support, curation, data curation support, and quality assurance steps all the way through. And I'm going to outline some of these. We also have a journalistic side to the journals. And that's something I'd be very interested in your feedback. I don't think we do enough about India, actually, but we do think it's important to build a community and to keep the scientific community together globally. And I think that's particularly important given the political climate these days in the world, that we sort of try to have really a scientific community that reaches across the world and has no borders. And that's what we're trying to achieve with that side. And there's also a lot of costs hidden in just the platforms and the production processes. There's about 120 steps in the production process alone, which we tend to forget. So basically, the quick point on scope, we've expanded our scope from the first slide you show. I showed you more recently into embrace ecology and environmental sciences, including environmental medicine and epidemiology across our journals, evolutionary biology, and in MSB, molecular systems biology in particular, we are focusing on protein design, bioengineering, biomedical technology. So we're basically trying to broaden even further than we used to be. And also one new topic is AI and machine learning, which I come back to a little bit from the publishing side in a second. In EMBO reports in particular, we're also focusing on a few new article types. We have methods and resource papers. We have what we call exploratory reports, and these are essentially very sort of preliminary but well controlled and provocative pieces of information that are not really well understood at this point. So in terms of mechanism and so on. So we're trying to really move things upstream a bit and encouraging people to share early on something really funky that they found. We also on the other side trying to sort of depressurize the system a bit because it's all relentlessly pushing at every level, and that's the funders, that's the research institution. Everything is driven by discovery, which is of course in principle great. But if you pose an interesting hypothesis, you should be rewarded just as much for disproving it and for proving it. Is essentially that's how science should work. The more provocative the hypothesis, the higher probably the chance of failure because the further you reach out. So with that in mind, we've really embracing also what we call confirmatory studies. We call these first confirmatory because we don't want to publish every confirmatory piece of work, but really provocative findings that were just discovered. If they're confirmed in an orthogonal way with different approaches, maybe in a broader way, that's evolutionary broader, then we're very happy to publish these. Equally, if you have null data, so you have a great hypothesis and you have data that does not support that, please submit it. Or if you disagree with what has been published elsewhere. If this is particularly broad-reaching and covers several other journals that were already published, then we would also welcome that here. And that sort of gets at this point, this is a quite provocative and outspoken EMBO member, actually, Sofian Kamoun from the plant sciences, who really said this, and I think that's a sentiment that's often felt. So how does it look across our, so this is across our EMBO Press journals, the 4 main EMBO Press journals. Massive change, massive demographic change, which you see on the right here. China now is 49% of our submissions, and that's only in the last 2-3 years this really exploded. So really very dramatic change. And India is here, 2.5%. That has not really changed very dramatically in the last 5 years. So it's holding its ground just after the main European countries and the United States, but China is the elephant in the room here. And how does that translate into published papers? You see the US, China are the #1 countries for us, followed by the larger European countries. And then India is pretty much the same. So pretty much the submission rate percentage and acceptance percentage is pretty much the same, which means about 10% acceptance rate, I think, which is in line with the other European countries. China, you can see immediately from this plot, has a significantly lower acceptance rate of only about 4%. However, it has to be emphasized, China really is holding its ground also at the top of the scientific thing here. For better or worse, let's look at citations. We're going to come back to how useful citations are in a minute. But China's really comparable to EU countries and United States in the top 10 percentile and top 1 percentile papers, and that's across all the literature. So it's doing really well now in science. So how are we selecting papers at our journals? We obviously, and this applies to almost any journal, I think, select for our scope criteria. We are very broad scope, as you heard. However, so we don't actually reject very much for scope. Apart from the exception here would be molecular systems biology and EMBO molecular medicine. But EMBO Journal and Reports doesn't often reject for scope. And then, of course, it should be no-brainer, but this really is not the case for every journal, that we should select for rigor, the rigor of the science, and the integrity of the science. Two different topics, two very big topics. However, we also select, and that's really by far the biggest selection criteria ultimately, for what we call the depth of the research, and that's particular for EMBO journal, where we really trying to have well-developed papers that really go into mechanistic depth, and for the breadth of the work. So we still feel as journals we have a duty, at least some journals, not all 35,000, but some journals have a duty to cross-fertilize knowledge, basically. And it's a really big topic, and I really welcome your input on this. What browsing means to you now. So classically, journals are here, of course, and journals, by the way, exist since the Royal Society and the Paris Scientific Association basically founded journals in 1650. So journals have existed for a long, long time. And of course, they exist as sort of magazines or as scholarly outputs to really cross-fertilize knowledge. And until recently, that's how it was. You picked up your latest issue in the library and flicked through it physically, through the cellulose in your hands. And that's how you would find surprising things. My whole PhD project was based on sitting on a train and rifling through nature, actually, and stumbling across something that we had just discovered in mammals that was already known in Drosophila, which we didn't know. So that is how it used to be, and that's completely changed, of course, now. So let's come back to this in a second. We also select very strongly for advanced, what we call conceptual advance, because we're trying to sort of enrich the cream of science, so that because this human brain can't absorb all the information, of course, that's out there. So we're trying to focus the browsing on the most exciting science in our journals. That's often called conceptual advance. It could be called the interest, the breadth and significance to a broad community, and that's often handed by impact. Now, impact is an interesting topic we come back to in a second. So I mentioned already many journals out there. We have over 3 million papers a year. So it's very important in our view that we still have this sort of stratification of knowledge via journals. That's a positive aspect of it. However, everything can be found now in a very, in a very nuanced and complex way beyond the keyword searches we had before, via AI, based technology. So it's an open question if we still need that sort of selection criteria, and instead maybe replace it with other things, such as how reproducible is the science that we share, and are you engaged in open science practices? Should that be criteria in the selection? So again, your input would be very interesting in that, because it's a moving target. So the impact, just a quick note on impact, that's often equated with impact factor. That is a complete misunderstanding. The impact factor, which is meant to measure impact, is actually a thing that was created to stratify journals. And that's a really important thing. It's a bibliometric number that was designed for librarians in the 1960s, to basically help librarians see which journals they want to pay for and subscribe to. Now that's been misused very dramatically and globally, essentially, for the assessment of individual research papers and as a proxy for the performance of individual authors or scientists. And that's a big problem, because it's actually scientifically completely flawed. So it really does not, an impact factor in a journal does not predict accurately the citation of a specific paper or specific scientist. Let's assume citations are a good measure, which is questionable anyway, but if they were, it's still a misuse to use the journal impact factor. So, of course, it's an indication, but it's not a 3 decimal point accurate predictor of performance in any way. It's a very subject to context. So if you're in a certain field, you will have higher citation rates. If you're publishing, certain fields have a certain dynamic range, so some cite very fast. Just think about COVID. Things cited super fast and it's completely gone. There's a big impact of geography. We have quite strong evidence, and we only discovered this quite recently, that the size of the country matters massively if you're not a very large country like India, because every country has a tendency to self-cite as a country. It's really fascinating, the social construct behind that. So big countries cite more than small countries. It also matters where you are. If you're in Harvard, you get more citations than if you're in Bangalore. If you happen to be famous, you get more citations. If you happen to publish in a sexy journal name, you get more citations. So all these things are confounding factors that together mean it's a very dodgy number to use for objective assessments. Citations are diverted to preprints now. I think I misspelled that, preprints, and reviews. So that's an important thing to think about. Many journals publish more and more reviews, partially to inflate the impact factors, but every citation to review is taken away from a citation to a primary research paper, to put it simply. Um, but let's move on. This has led to a lot of gaming by journals, but also by everybody essentially in the system, and indeed fraud. So we're now getting, unfortunately, we're getting paper mill papers that are submitted solely to increase the citation rate of individual scientists. They're completely invented papers that are sometimes submitted, and we're seeing the first examples of that at EMBO Press, unfortunately, which we still caught. They are completely invented just to self-cite, basically. Okay, so I think I've said enough about this because we want to move on to more interesting topics. But in case you have questions on the impact factor, why it's flawed, I have another 10 things to say about it. So maybe we just move on. But have a quick look at this distribution, and I think to any scientist it's pretty clear what the problems here really are. But we can come back to that in the discussion. Okay. So basically, let's just talk a little bit about our process. So we're trying to be informed, impartial, and as equitable as we can. If you have ideas how to make it better, please tell us. We are a community publisher. We're doing things to improve science, not to make money or to be nasty. So please tell us how to improve the things. So as an author, you submit your paper, and currently this is for about 30-40% of our papers, that is the form of the preprint. So people typically co-submit and preprint at the same time. We have a service that does this automatically. Here you see for the EMBO journal the number of preprints in red. Then it goes into our editorial office, and the first step is a triage process. So we basically have a very, very fast look at the paper, and for us this means 3 independent editors look for about 2 to 3 minutes at title and abstract and just see, is it in scope for the journal, and does it look like something that is sufficiently surprising and interesting for us to read in full. That is a process we only started 2-3 years ago. We were very nervous about it. We still feel pretty comfortable. We've analyzed this. The decisions seem to be solid because we have 3 independent views, and we actually agree really strongly, which doesn't, maybe we all have the same biases, but we see, and I should also say they're anonymized papers. So we're trying to sort of not be biased by country and so on by taking the names out. However, that's necessary because of this China effect that I showed you, where we have so many submissions from China and the acceptance rate is rather low. Then we have a quality control process where we basically see are some basic quality criteria met, such as is the data supplied and so on. And then it goes to editorial selection, which means an editor spends 1 to 2 hours reading the paper and summarizing in detail, bringing it to our 2 o'clock every day editorial meeting and discussing it. And Sarita has been part of this for a few weeks now, where we sort of get input from the wider team, and that's often a very intense and interesting discussion. Then we select about 20 to 25% of the first submissions ultimately for peer review. It means it goes to 3 referees. That takes about a month, the whole process. And it's the classic peer review process with a few added bells and whistles. And you see that little arrow on top here. The referees are invited to comment on each other's referee reports as part of this process, which is really, really powerful. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Ultimately, because we have this very strong pre-selection, we publish about 50% of the peer-reviewed manuscript. So once you're on peer review, you have a really good chance to progress, and we really think that works because the referees, feel they're investing their time in something that will actually lead to published paper very often, and you hopefully spend the time in taking the referee reports on board and revising things properly. That we try to support by having a very simple policy. And when you select journals, I would really keep an eye out for that, because not all of them do that, which we call scooping protection, which means basically during this whole process from pre-printing to publication, it doesn't matter what else is published. We want you to take the time to do revisions properly, and basically within a certain time frame. It doesn't matter what else is published, you just cite it in the paper, but we don't reject for that. Then we have, after peer review, the editors come back in and, of course, analyze the referee reports, and we have a quality control step, which is quite detailed, really long lists of things we go through, very, very tiring for us and particularly for you too, I'm afraid. But that's essential for having reproducible papers. And we're trying to automate as much as possible in the future of that. We have a one round of revision guide, basically. It's not a policy, it's a guide, and almost all papers really have only one round of revision, more than 80% now. And when I mean revision, it means experimental revision. And ultimately, 94% of these invited revisions are published. So once you're invited to revise a paper, you're almost certain to get in if you do the revisions requested. So that works really, really well. So a very selective upstream, and once you're in the system, you're almost certain to get out. We do have an integrity process at the final revision step, which we'll come to in a second. And then it's published. In publication takes about 12 days. So basically, here's a few policies that I wanted to mention. We do have the scooping protection, which I mentioned. We're trying to increasingly balance our referee panels by geography also. We're always trying to have one from the wider Asia Pacific region. We're trying, and not necessarily doing well enough yet, to also balance by gender and scientific experience more. We're trying to be more open to early career researchers. I won't talk much more about this. If you have questions, I'm quite excited to have a completely new way to do peer review in the future with early career researchers that focuses more on the data than the paper. We have no confidential referee comments. Everything the author sees is basically what the editor sees. And then we have this consultative process I mentioned, which is that the referees referee each other, basically. That's something we invented about 12 years ago, and it's becoming more standard across other journals now too. Really powerful. And then we have the question, and again, your feedback, very interested here, of structured referee reports. We use that at some of our journals and review comments, but not at all of our journals yet. So this looks basically at trying to parse out the referee comments into three boxes, if you want. One is really focused on the evidence, reproducibility, and clarity of the presentation. One is on the significance. And the third one is really to estimate for every point the referee makes, to try to estimate the time to complete and the cost to complete these revisions. Then we have a relatively new thing, which we really like, which is basically to go back to the authors before we make a decision. So when we get the three reports in, we send them to the authors and give them, invite a Zoom call like this, basically, where we discuss the referee comments together. And that is very powerful because it gives the authors a chance to sort of rebut or suggest alternatives to the points the referees make before the editor makes up their mind on what to do with the paper. We do try to justify our decision letters in as much detail as we can, and give, particularly when we invite revisions, very clear guidance what things have to be addressed of the referee reports and what things do not have to be addressed of the referee reports. So again, after we send you the letter, we welcome further discussion. If things are unclear, or if you're worried about it, how doable a certain point is, we're trying to be really make this a two-way process. And then we have this one realistic round of experimental revision. For us, this takes about 3 months. So we would define this as realistic, at least in terms of time. And then we also have now a catch-up point. So we typically give also as a guide. So our revisions do take 3 months, but we also give as a guide to do it in 3 months. At 3 months, that's not a deadline. It just means, please, let's have a check-in at 3 months to see how things are going. If you're stuck on certain experiments, let's talk about if there's alternatives, if we can drop certain points, or maybe transfer the paper from EMBO Journal to EMBO Reports, for example, if you get stuck on certain issues. So this is just sort of a much more consultative and two-way process overall. We publish our papers alongside with the referee reports. We call this transparent peer review. It's not open peer review because most referees don't sign the reports, but we publish these reports together with the author responses and the editorial decision letters of every round, typically one round, as I said, but these can be quite substantive documents. And we're now using AI to summarize these documents. You can see here automated summary of the reviews um, up here, and it gives you a complete timeline of every step in the process and all the referee reports at the bottom. All these things are citable individually. So that's becoming a really scholarly unit of knowledge in its own right. So we also trying to make the process more efficient by having a transfer process between our journals and beyond. And this is based on consultative transfers. And that's a really important concept where two journals talk to each other before offering a transfer. So for you as an author, this gives you assurance that it essentially often gives you two choices. You know, it's like going to the doctor and going to two different doctors and getting two different opinions, and then you choose where you want to go, what you want to pursue. That so it's really designed to give you more choices and more choices with commitment, which is important. It's not just some vague recommendation. It's actually after pre-consultation. Review comments I'll explain in just a second. That's a really important new element in the process, and we extended this now to say you can come to us from any other journal with your referee reports as long as we have some sort of way to validate that these are authentic referee reports. So this is going really well. For example, 38% of EMBO reports papers now come in through various transfer mechanisms. And we've recently extended this to also include the nature journals. So we have a consultative process with all the nature journals now, including the nature review journals. So if something doesn't fit into nature journals, they talk to us and then we make a decision if we want to offer it from an EMBO Press journal. And a lot of these are coming over now. So a quick points about open science, and I think we now have to rush a bit. So I'm going to talk a tiny bit about open science and a tiny bit about research integrity, and then we're done. Okay. So open science, in case you're not convinced, it started with the Human Genome Project in biology, which is a wonderful picture book story of how open science can work in principle. The process was massively accelerated by sharing information 24/7, which allowed Craig Venter from Celera to do shotgun sequencing, which he couldn't have done without the 24/7 release, as you see also from his quote here, which in turn accelerated the public Human Genome Project, which was base-by-base sequencing massively because they were under massive pressure to perform. And it came in under cost and in time, basically, because of that. COVID, another picture book example where things went extremely well with open science. Some very brave Chinese scientists actually, against orders, released some information very early on and got punished for that. So really brave, and that accelerated the vaccine development absolutely massively. We're still stuck on finding the origin of the COVID virus because that's where open science didn't work. We still don't have the primary swabs released from the marketplace. So, you know, that's the story of how it works and doesn't work in open science. So the volume's massive. I mentioned how many journals and papers we have. We have to always remember that there's orders of magnitude more information that's swishing around in science. Some is now captured by preprints, but much is captured by structured databases. And these tend to struggle because the funding is often not long-term secure. And it's sort of underappreciated how important these databases really are. And we're trying to sort of align these better with the journal publishing process to have a sort of inline curation, a linear curation process from database to journal. We are very well placed to do that because EMBO, our partner organization just across from my window here, actually runs the biggest European database collection in the EBI in Cambridge. And then you have unstructured databases like Zenodo, Figshare, BioStudies, Dryad, so on that can capture any type of data without much structure. So preprints have now really taken up in biology. You're probably all aware of this, the various preprint platforms in medicine too. So this is really very recent and it's starting to also be completely accepted across the journals that this is a legitimate output. So you should not worry that you were rejected for preprinting. We strongly encourage this. And we have this new concept of referee preprint. So what does that mean? This is also linked to review comments. So let me explain what this is. We basically launched this platform over 2 years ago now, and it's very simple. We just turned publishing upside down. We just said, let's dissociate peer review from publishing and offer it as a separate service. So it gives you independent views on your work or preprint, which you can then use to find a journal home more efficiently. Because you know what other people think about your work, you can improve it before submitting. We thought this might accelerate the finding a home because there was a lot of friction by there was lots of different types of data that showed that people have to go to 2, 3, even 5 journals before they find a home. So that was designed to help with that originally. But then we thought, why don't we post all these referee reports on the preprint version of the paper? So that's what's called a refereed preprint. And you can also do this, by the way, from direct submissions to any of our journals. So outside the review comments, you just tell us and we post them on the bioarchives version of your preprint. I tell you in just a second why that's really powerful. However, this process is completely free. It's journal agnostic. There's about 32 partner journals that you see here. And they basically have committed to using those referee reports in their own journal assessment. That means they will not re-peer review the papers. So you basically have a choice of up to 4 journals of this in linearly, not in parallel. But you click one, they assess it with those referee reports, and you go to the next if they don't like it. And does it work? Yes, all these journals get papers through review comments. Almost all of them find a home at some point. And we have also data, which I don't show you here for time reasons, that shows that it accelerates the publishing process quite significantly. So why is this refereed preprint really powerful? Because I think it really helps to solve the postdoc dilemma, what I call the valley of tears, which is basically you have only 3 years to do your postdoc. At EMBO, we only fund 2 years, actually. It's really too little, but that's all the money we have. And your paper is not out by the time you finish, and you already have to apply for your next postdoc, your next grant, so you're stuck. And often we see, I think, that people get panicked and accelerate their revision process, and that's when we see a lot of problems happening by taking shortcuts. So by having this refereed preprint, which is much faster than having a published paper, you have a unit in hand that demonstrate the quality of your output already way before the journal paper. Okay, and that really addresses a really fundamental issue as long as research assessment takes this seriously. And I'm really happy to say that at EMBO, for the EMBO fellowships, which is postdoctoral support, or EMBO Young Investigators, which is PI support, the committees take a refereed preprint just as they would a published research paper in their research assessment. That's more extra work for them. They actually have to read the reports and so on, but it's much better than naked preprint, where they have hundreds of applications. How do you deal with 300 preprints swishing about? You have no idea how good they are and so on without really thinking about it or being an expert. So that really is powerful, I think. So point about data and open science, our journals are trying to rediscover what's in our figures. We've always focused on the text, and it's really important that we make this the data behind the figures not only fair, that means findable, accessible, interoperable, and basically reusable, but also to make them fit for purpose, really. So look at these pictures. They're really pretty pictures that support the textual conclusions in the paper: one embryo, one tissue section, one cell. And they're all, of course, highly selected and meant to be emblematic of the very complex data that we have in the lab. But ultimately, they're merely illustrations. And of course, they're often not just randomly selected. They are often selected to make a strong story. So we want to capture what you have in your lab book. And how do we do that? We basically have every figure panel now supported with a link out with primary research data. And that includes not just the data underlying that specific figure in higher resolution, less cropped with all the metadata associated, as you see here for the mitochondria without false coloring, for example, but also replicates. You can put all the replicates in, and that adds a lot of value. How does this look? We have every figure now with a data hub version, which is on biostudies, which is run by the EBI, our partner organization. It's completely free, so you have a data version of every paper now. Same title, same abstract, but then a much more structured way to see the paper from the data point of view. That's separately citable, so it's a full unit of scholarly output. Also, every figure panel can now have its own authorship. So basically, this hopefully this addresses the problem of middle authors that often fall through the cracks. You can spend months and months doing work, and then you end up in author position number 5 or 6 and get very frustrated. Now, at every figure panel, you can have your own authorship, and that's important for a credit, but also for basically for finding when problems arise who actually did the work. So we do have a problem because reproducibility by many different measures is only 50% of research papers. That is a pretty shocking number. And it's probably pretty close to accurate because there's many different ways to measure this. Important to make the simple point, and I'm running out of time here, 40 minutes just about, so I'm going to go a little bit fast. I have, I think, 3 more slides. Basically, it's really important to remember this not just because research integrity and fraud. In my view, this is largely because we have limited mechanisms to share methods and protocols accurately, and many journals don't share their source data. So we really have to do this. I told you about the data. We're now focusing on methods. So we've new guidelines that we drop the word limits on methods. We encourage reuse of text. So outside the plagiarism screens, we basically curate the methods more, that we don't allow citations to other papers to as a proxy for methods. And we have structured methods, so you really have to add structured details on the reagents. We have a reagents sharing table, and so on. So a lot of stuff in here. I don't have time to talk about it. If you're interested, we published a paper and developed a cross-journal standard together with the EU called ProMap, which we just published in PLOS Biology. Okay, so I'm gonna go over this super fast. I'm sorry, this is taking a bit too long. We're very excited in the future to have data-focused peer review that is based on human and AI, a combination of human and AI, and we've developed a platform for that, which we call Data for Rev, which is super exciting based on AI technology. So in the future, we're gonna try to convince you to submit your source data already at first submission. At the moment, you only have to submit it before publication, but it really should be part of the peer review and quality control process. So we're going to move this upstream in the future, next 5 years, and then peer review it. Review and peer review it with AI and humans. It's going to be revolutionary. And just to show you that this is all very, very difficult, this is just one example on imaging. And the 3 circles you see were the sort of platforms we had about 6-7 years ago to analyze microscopy images. This is now turned into a jungle. These are the latest platforms available, and standards are trying to catch up. So there's on the right you see paper that was just released on trying to structure this incredibly complex information. And for journals, it's a massive challenge. What do we screen for? What should be our guidelines? Which platforms do we allow? How do we make sure that a legitimate platform is used, and so on? Very, very difficult. AI is, of course, the solution that's always thrown out. It's easier said than done. However, we are developing quite a lot of tools together, alone or together with others on this. I'm out of time, so just to say that we are using it for various things already on our side, including all kinds of tools. The latest one we discussed only yesterday in our editorial meeting, which is an amazing or potentially really dramatic tool that does automatic peer review, which you may use as an editorial support tool. Sorry, that was a misstatement. It's not peer review, it's review. So that's really important. No humans. It's totally automated. But it also allows you to do literature analysis, different tools, text writing, of course, authoring, data rendering. We are using it for plagiarism screens, for image integrity screens, in particular, very, very good at duplication detection across the whole literature now. Source data and metadata quality control is in the works, as I briefly mentioned, and paper mill detection, which is something that's really, really difficult and important. You can use any AI tool you want. completely fine with that as long as you declare it as transparently as you can. That's something we ask. And you have to remember that you as a human are responsible for the output. You are the author, not the AI. We do not allow AI authorship. Questionable research practices, very big problem. I just jumped through this. The numbers are really scary. So self-reporting here, massive numbers of issues. Just to show you a couple of screenshots of the type of stuff that we see here. Highly contrasted band. If you change the contrast, which we did on request, you see a band in a knockout control. Completely changes the interpretation, same data. Don't mess around, please. Here's the excuse of the authors. We have other papers that did the same, so we thought we can do the same. We request source data, we request proper controls, and we publish that paper. But don't oversimplify and mess around. Here's another example of where somebody just moved a cell from the top right to the bottom right. God knows why. It looks still pretty ugly, I think, for aesthetic reasons, presumably. So we call this beautification. Again, don't mess around, because if you do this more dramatically, you get things like this, where people rub out half the signal in a microscopy image. It turns out these were all dead cells in the background, which again changes the interpretation. So is this fraud or is this beautification? So we have a standardized way to assess these things now. It's a lot of work, basically. The problem, underlying problem, is I think that people misunderstand what data is. So they see it as a pretty picture to illustrate a conclusion rather than real data. We also, where many mistakes happen, and we see so many mistakes, that's why we're doing this screening upstream of publication, because we can rectify so many mistakes. This was when I was at Nature. We were so proud to publish Dolly the sheep when I was an editor at Nature. And turns out, of course, there was two Dollys. Dolly's mum was in the picture too. So that little obscene leg you see in the back, which, once you know it, it looks completely crazy. And that was a Photoshop mishap. So we always have a presumption of innocence when we look at these things, and we have a very careful process. So we look at image, data, text. We have a structured classification to see what the problems are, and we do very careful post-publication corrections, which with transparency, we always explain in great detail. We had a 2-hour call yesterday with somebody, with 2 PIs from Germany that discovered massive fraud in their EMBO reports paper. And we discussed with them to put all of this, going to be 2-page explanation of what went wrong, and everything went wrong. It's really dramatic. And then we set standards for other journals to also adopt this thing. It's something we have to deal with between funders, researchers, and the journals. We can't do this alone, so it's really important to be collaborative about this massive problem. One thing we did was to, rather than retracting whole papers, we now have figure panel level retractions and corrections and replacements. So that's one thing that's really great. So I talked to you about open access a little bit, about data, the importance of data in papers, about methods, and I think that and preprints, and the review commons platform in particular as a preprint, a refereed preprint dissemination tool. So with that, please ask me some questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernd. This was personally so enriching for me, because I've always been on the other side when I've been on the author side, and to look at it from an editor's or how does a publishing house takes it up was very, very enriching. And of course, it looks very easy from the outside, but I'm sure it's not, as you've already mentioned in your presentation. So, everyone, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. We'll be slowly taking it up. So, an earlier question that I think you have already covered, but if you want to add on anything, was from a participant who asked, how long does it generally take to peer review a research article? I think that person wants to know timelines, probably.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So our editorial says, so the triage, let's just start from the beginning. The triage process is almost the same day. So as soon as a paper comes in, we do this literally every day. Well, it depends. One or two of our journals does it every second day, and some of our journals do it every day. So you get an answer back really, really fast. And that's part of the point. It's fast and a bit ugly if you want. The full read, so we decide to peer review papers typically within 5 days. So that means in under a week, it's clear if something goes out to peer review or you hear back from us. with hopefully a slightly detailed decision letter. Uh, the peer review itself, which is what you asked, i- almost invariably, and this is I've done this for 30 years now as an editor, it invariably takes a month. And anyone who says it takes 2 weeks doesn't do a good job at it. It's really because if you expect to get three really authoritative people on board and ensure that they deliver for us, and you're welcome to look into any of our published papers to see the referee reports because we publish them, as I mentioned. You see that they are multi-page, really substantive pieces of work, and that takes. So for us, we've got feedback that they take about 7 hours on average to write or to do per referee, and many say it takes them more than a day of work to do that. So that's why we do think it's legitimate to invest that time. However, we do have this very strong pre-selection to save you the time if the chances, in our view, are somewhat limited. Now, I welcome feedback because we're really brutal at the first selection step, and of course, it's not uncontroversial. So do let me know.
So just from my personal question, that when the triage process happens, is it anonymous? Or do you have
Yes.
an idea about who the author is, where is the author from, where is the paper
Yeah,
from?
so
Both.
basically, yeah. So we do ask our assistant at EMBO Reports. Our assistant anonymizes every day the new submissions in, and then we get a basically Word document with just title and abstract. And for the first read, we don't know. Of course, then
Yeah.
once you open it up, you do know that. But we do think that's quite important because it's quite easy when you just look at that little bit of information,
Yeah.
title and abstract, to be swayed by, oh, here's another paper from you know
Yeah.
who and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. So, my colleague Manjula has a question. She's asking, how do publishers calculate article processing charges? And is there a transparency in how these fees are set?
Yeah, that's a really great question and very legitimate. Often there's absolutely no transparency. I'm glad to say we have transparency. So if you go on our internet site, and we're going to publish the latest numbers were 2023. The 24 numbers should go up very soon. We've broken it down. I mean, it's still not super granular. We
Mhm.
actually have the next release you'll see will be much, much more granular because what we did, so currently you see just a bar chart that basically says this block of money went to the production process, this block of money went to the editorial process, and so on. But you do see the cost, the real cost of the process reported, which will also tell you that we actually make about 22% of surplus. That was before we went fully open access of surplus that's invested into our postdoc fellowships and PI support and conferences, basically completely. So, we're not for profit. So, but that's an interesting topic. Should journals be used to make extra income for private entities? Well, interesting question. Or for public ones, even should it be reinvested in science? So, for example, it also allowed us to support. So we had we had no publication charges in India until now, which was cross-supported essentially by other um, fees. So basically, we are transparent. You can see that, and the next release, and that's why it's a bit delayed, will show you because we measured exactly the hours we take at the editorial level for every step in the process. So we can actually break it down more, saying the triage process costs this much, the full peer review process costs this much. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah.
One more question that I had, till others are probably putting in questions, is are there successful examples of low cost or no cost open access models?
Yes, well, review comments is one, so that's free. And again, that's sort of an interesting thing. Nothing in the world is free, really. So it's actually free because it's the EMBO Press editors doing this as a side job, basically. So again, you could say this is cross-supported by the APC fees of those that are published right now. We're trying to find really hard, trying to find other mechanisms. So one of these is called Diamond Open Access, which is sort of core-funded to core-fund some of these activities. And actually, the Review Commons is core-funded at the moment through Howard Hughes Medical Institute. and it was funded before by the Bosch Foundation in Germany. So that is actually strongly supported by funders, but there's almost no funders that are prepared to do long-term support for these kind of activities right now. That's something we're discussing very strongly. I'm going to be in Berlin next week actually we would really like the funders to pick up some of the basic costs for quality assurance. So for example, the research integrity screens I mentioned, the infrastructure and support. So we have a data curator, for example, one staff. Uh, that activity for open science, those things they all add to the APC at the moment, make it really expensive. So we would really like, because these funders are really, it's mandated that you do open science now. So if you want this mandated and you want it to be done properly, then give us the money directly to do it properly. That's how you change the system, rather than shoving all of this on top of the APCs, which is
Yeah.
difficult.
So there's another question from Rekha who's asking, review process taking more than 2 months in this scenario, is there any chance to have hope on a positive uh, result probably for publishing the article in the journal?
Oh, you're saying if it takes so long, is that a sign that it's not going to go
It's
well? Hmm.
probably that.
Not necessarily. It sometimes is. It literally is very difficult sometimes to find referees. So the further the topic from our bread and butter, if you want, the more actually we struggle as editors to find referees in the first place. But also the more often than not, it takes longer to peer review. So that's not necessarily a sign of poorer quality. However, it is true to say if we struggle, so we do have a correlation that when we have to ask more than 30 people to find 3 referees, and this sometimes goes up to 50 people, that's already shows you why it's delayed. That is often a sign that there's something wrong with the paper, or that we didn't appreciate that it's not going to go well in peer review either. So we're actually debating, and I'd be interested in your feedback. We're actually debating sometimes if we should say, if we can't find 3 referees after 25 or 30 asks, maybe we should just return it to the authors and say, sorry, maybe we messed up, but we couldn't find them. So it's maybe in your own interest to go elsewhere because it's probably not going to go well. Because at that point, we also don't have the best referees anymore to hand, and it might end in tears. So I'll be really interested in what you think about that.
I mean, it's also 2 months of the author's time that has gone without any
Anything,
news.
yeah.
And at the same time, we cannot even submit it at any other place
No,
because that's how peer
no,
review
exactly.
publishing
Yeah,
works, right? So from an
yeah.
author point of view, I do agree that if it's taking really long, it's the journal's responsibility to at least let the author know that, it's in the process or taking some time for us to get reviewers instead of expecting the authors to think
Mm,
whatever. This period is not very, very positive in the author's mind when it's
no,
taking so long for the
yeah,
review process to happen. So, um,
yeah.
yeah.
No, that's a fair point. And by the way, you should always, as an author, feel empowered. That's something that's really underappreciated. If you get fed up, just pull the paper. I mean, don't submit elsewhere without telling the journal, but just pull the paper. The same goes if you feel that the journal is asking you for stuff that's silly or that you disagree with, and it's just too painful, then you are very welcome to informally talk to other journals. You can't do this formally. You can't submit to 2 journals at the same time, but you can have informal discussions, and at some point you can pull a paper and just go elsewhere. And that's also why I briefly mentioned we allow referee reports to come over from any other journal just to empower people to be more flexible and take charge of their own paper.
There's one more, I think more of a comment than a question, from Dev Prasad Datta, who's saying that lots of authors in India are trapped in open access costs and it is getting increasingly high. He thinks that we need to have a movement to make all journals hybrid or have a open select model of publishing. This model provides freedom for all parties, publishers, authors, and readers to choose how they want to publish.
Yeah,
So.
well, it's a fair point, and we were hybrid journals for 20 years beforehand. We were forced by the main funders in Europe in particular to go fully open access. Just to put this bluntly, of course, we want to be open access because it is in principle a much better thing, right? Because you can read every paper and it's very, very important. But we always knew the prices would be pretty high, and this is why we thought the hybrid system self adjust and organically move towards open access. But our funders have mandated it to be either fully open access as a journal or not. The Wellcome Trust does not allow you to publish a paper now. I'm not sure about the Wellcome India Alliance, but the Wellcome Trust in Europe, and many other of these funders, which is great if they put the money into the system. So in a transition period, I think it will happen, and increasingly in Germany, for example, all your fees are centrally regulated and covered, so you don't even notice that these charges appear. So, I think India has to think how it wants to administer these charges. The money is in the system. The money your institution paid for subscriptions, the money is there. It just has to be redistributed either to you as an author to pay the APC. It should not come out of your research budget. That's a big, big problem.
But that's what
But
happens of the
yes,
institutes.
that's what
Yeah.
happens. Yes,
They have
I
to go
totally
through the,
understand. Yeah.
yeah.
But you have to talk to the ministry and to your librarians very, very actively about this because the money is there in principle. And there is of course it's super complex. I'm totally simplifying
Yeah, yeah.
here. Because there's a massive shift from research intensive universities which used to which pay the brunt now before the charges were all distributed across many subscribers, irrespective of how research intensive you were. Now the money is focused really on research intensive institutions, so that there is a massive redistribution of the costs. So I'm totally oversimplifying, but
Yeah,
still
yeah.
overall globally the money is in the system. It's a misunderstanding to say open access is cheaper or more expensive. Quality is quality, it's just
Yeah. Also, I think there's a comment from Pradeep Nagraj, who I think has a personal thing to discuss, and he'll probably get back to you by on an email. So if you want, you could just have a look at the chat window. Other than that, there are no more questions in the chat window. If there's anybody who still wants to ask, maybe we can still have 1 or 2 minutes more. You could
sure.
probably directly unmute and ask if you don't want to type, or else we'll probably close the session then.
Before we close, I just want to say thank you on behalf of EMBO to the India Bioscience team for all your support in organizing these webinar series on the EMBO programs and EMBO Press webinars. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. It was great working with the EMBO team as well from our side. Okay, there's one question that has come up. I think if a paper is under review and it is taking more than 3 months, what should I do? I think Bernd has already answered that, but do you want to add anything, Bernd?
Well, yes, again, so three months is exceptionally long. And I think very legitimately write back. There's often too much awe in saying, "Oh, I don't want to annoy the editor." If the editor is not responsive, you can escalate it to the chief editor, and so on. And at some point, if the journal is just unresponsive, that's not a good sign, really. And feel free to pull the paper. Now, this is easier said than done, of course, if you feel you have to start again. But as I mentioned, there are journals that also take, and the Journal of Cell Biology is another example. They take referee reports from other journals and take, so you haven't wasted the time per se. As long as you have some referee reports in hand. Now, if you have nothing after 3 months, then of course you have lost that time, I have to say.
Yep. So
Try
I
to review
think
comments.
almost so I think we're almost at the end of the session. I'll just put in the feedback form, if at all. It'll just help us, you know, review the comments and make the sessions better. So I request everyone who's attending to take just a minute more from your time and fill this feedback form. It doesn't have a lot of questions, There are just 4 or 5 questions which will help us improve these sessions more. And thank you so much for attending the session today. And we do have IGAP articles on our website, so do visit the IGAP section where we do talk about international grants and have open calls which are available for grants and other things on the IGAP website. So do keep an eye on that, and hopefully we'll be back with another session soon. So thank you so much for attending and have a good evening. And thank you, Bernd and Tiffany, for especially taking out time to do this with us.
Thanks, Rushi. That's great. Really nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.